name is Jörg Peters. I'm from Germany. I work at RWI, which is a think tank based in Germany. I've been studying energy access in various developing countries in Africa mostly for the last 10-15 years, and we've also worked a lot in Rwanda, where we have done 3 larger studies on electrification program, the ERP program actually, and also off-grid solar. And this has happened actually in cooperation with Anicet Munyeire from IBC Rwanda. Maybe the most or the biggest study in Rwanda was the evaluation of the big electricity access rollout program, the ERP program, and that happened between 2011 and 2014. Yeah, I think about the ERP findings, there are 4 points I could make. So one of the first observation we made was that the program was very effective in terms of like rolling out the grid, which happened very successfully, and this cannot be taken for granted. So in many African countries, governments do have the funds to roll out the grid, and it's not really happening for years. And it was very successful in Rwanda. And the first thing maybe was that connection rates are fairly high in our sample, so the villages that we surveyed, but still at 60%. So I think we have to think about how to connect those people to the grid that have not yet been connected in villages that are generally connected to the grid. The third result, maybe that is worth being emphasized, is that people actually really like electricity, so it's a high priority for them. And the fourth point is that impacts in terms of what many donors and also governments expect, so productive use and kind of economic development, it has been very humble. So appliance uptake was very low also after 4 or 5 years. And this is why we think that in particular in remote, or let's say mostly in remote areas, economic development effects might be rather low. So in addition to this ERP evaluation, we also did 2 studies on the adoption and the impacts of off-grid solar technologies, so Pico PV and solar home systems. And what we found there was that, of course, the effects are of course smaller than for a grid connection, but still it's a considerable improvement of people's lives. In particular, compared to the low investment costs that these technologies entail, they come at prices between $10, $20, or maybe $80. And compared to these investment costs, the effects were quite considerable. The second point in terms of off-grid solar is that so we did a study on the willingness to pay for off-grid solar, and what we observed there was that the people are hardly able to pay cost-covering prices. So we actually think that if a government or the government of Rwanda pursues universal uptake of modern energy in the near future, we think that subsidies are probably required to enable the poor to adopt these technologies. Yeah, so I think the message that can be taken away for policy from our studies is that policy should think about where to roll out the grid. So does the region, or do these regions really require the grid in the near future, or are demand patterns maybe like that? Off-grid solar is enough, and then focus the grid extension on like high potential regions, and support the poorer regions by subsidies for off-grid solar.
My name is Adina Rome. I work at ETH Zurich. So my research is about the take-up, use and impact of solar lighting in rural Kenya. So in this research we use 2 different types of solar lights. So on the one hand we have the Sun King Eco Light. This provides lighting for 4 to 30 hours and costs around $9 at market price. And on the other hand we use the Sun King Mobile Light. It's a bit larger. It costs $24 at market price, and with that light you can also charge a mobile phone. So I worked in Busia in western Kenya. Our sample was 1,400 households, and we randomly allocated these households to different types of treatments. First, looking at take-up of solar lights, we find that at market price of $9, take-up is around 30%, and it then increases to almost 40% when prices are reduced to $7, and to almost 70% when they're at $4. When we distributed the lights for free, everybody in our sample took up the solar lights. So we can see from this that there is a pretty sharp increase in take-up as prices reduce. So in addition to the take-up results I just presented, we find that these solar lights are really used by rural households. So they're typically used for about 3.5 hours per day. And we also find that everybody uses them a lot, both people who receive them for free and people who purchase them. And children are typically the main users of their solar lights. We also find that children increase their lighting hours as a result of having access to solar. In addition, we find that households reduce their kerosene consumption by around 1.4 liters per month. That's more than a 50% reduction of the kerosene that they would use otherwise. And this leads to a reduction in harmful emissions, which is relevant for both, for indoor air pollution and also for the planet and global warming. So we see, as a result, a reduction in health symptoms for both children and adults in the households. And we also find that households reduce their monthly expenditure, their overall expenditure, by around 3%. Finally, there are also some areas where we didn't find any effects, and that is there's no change in lighting hours for adults. So adults don't increase their lighting hours as opposed to children. And we also don't see any effects on test scores for children. So I'm really grateful that we have this discussion between researchers and policymakers, because I do believe that evidence from research can contribute a lot for decision making in policy, and I'm grateful we are having this exchange. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our partners and donors, in particular SolarAid. We worked very closely with them for this research. They're one of the biggest distributor of these small solar lights in East Africa. And I would also like to thank Google, because they're the donor of this endeavor.